Hey everyone. Just gonna wait a minute, let some people start showing up. This is not my typical live stream. Usually when I do a live stream, I am recording myself doing art. Today I'm doing a Q&A about making a tarot deck and self-publishing a tarot deck, which I'm going to be totally transparent about. I am probably not the most qualified person to be giving advice on this topic, but I have made a deck before. I've made two of them. I'm making my third one. I've gotten like a surprising amount of questions about making a deck recently. And some of the people who had reached out to me and asked about making and self-publishing a deck had said that other creators had not been like particularly helpful, just in that they kind of wanted to keep their process private, which I understand, to each their own, whatever you want to do, whatever's right for you. But I really want to kind of cultivate an artistic community that is collaborative rather than competitive, and so I want to be really willing to share my process with people. And since quite a few people had asked about it in the past month or so, I thought that I would just offer to do a Q&A, and there was a lot of really nice positive reception to that idea. So here we are. This is what we're doing today. Welcome. If you just got here, hello. Welcome. So I've got my computer in front of me. I'm going to be kind of looking down at my screen a lot during this probably, so I apologize for that. But I've been kind of collecting questions throughout the past few weeks, and I have them sort of written down. So I'm going to kind of talk about the questions and the topics that people have already brought up to me, and at any point during this, I'll kind of try and be keeping an eye out for if you want to ask a question in the comments during the stream. That's totally fine. I'll try and answer those as they're showing up. If I miss them, feel free to ask again, or I'll give some time at the very end to talk about those as well if I don't cover something you were curious about in the questions that I already have written down. So most of the questions that I got were kind of about the same general topics. So I'm just going to talk about these topics for the most part, because I got a lot of questions that kind of fit into these certain categories. Caleb says, good to see you. Good to see you, Caleb. Hope you're doing well. Haven't talked to you in a while, but welcome. So a bunch of people just kind of asked a really broad question: what is your process? And so I've kind of broken what my process is down into a lot of different sort of phases. This is kind of the process that I've used making the decks that I've published so far. I'm sure that this is not the exact process that everyone is following when they're making a deck, but for me, it of course starts with researching and making the artwork. Those two things kind of happen simultaneously for me. I'm sure a lot of people are doing research before they ever start making any artwork, and I do research before I do art, but a lot of the times those two things are happening together. Research when you're making a tarot deck, a lot of you who are interested in making a tarot deck, you've already done a lot of research. You already know how to read tarot, probably. So you've already got a lot of research done, probably. But I felt like it was a good idea for each deck that I've made to kind of, as I'm working on it, each time I start a new piece, each time I'm working on a new card, I like to just kind of absorb as much information about that card as I can. For something like an Oracle deck, that's different because I'm making up my own cards, but for the tarot deck, for the Lenormand deck, I would read a bunch of different descriptions of the card that have been written by different people. I use an app called Galaxy Tarot, which has a really nice description for each card. Biddy Tarot also has a nice description for each card. So just kind of going through, learning how those cards are interpreted differently by different people, but also kind of learning what major themes are always there. Doing that research as you work, for me, I felt like that was important. There's also artistic research aside from just the research on the subject matter you're doing, whether that's tarot cards or Lenormand cards or whatever. I would spend time looking at artwork that other people have made. Ink, which was really inspired by CLO Thompson's Lion Strider deck and Trung Le Nguyen's Star Spinner Tarot deck. So I'd spend a lot of time looking at artwork that other people had made, or kind of collecting decks. If you are somebody who is interested in making a tarot deck, you already probably have a collection of decks to kind of use as references. But art and research, that's kind of step one. Step two, once that art is created, I upload it onto my computer and I do a little bit of digital editing, which a few people asked about. A couple people wanted to know how much editing happens on the computer after the artwork's actually finished. For me, not very much. A lot of artists are making all of their artwork digitally. A lot of artists are doing a lot of digital editing. There's no right or wrong amount of editing to do, whatever makes you happy. But for me, very little editing is happening afterwards. I would use Photoshop to maybe kind of do some minor touch-ups on certain cards, add text, of course, formatting the cards for the size of a tarot deck. The big thing, though, that I do with editing that's probably important, no matter who you are or what type of deck you're making, is editing it for brightness and contrast. When you're printing a tarot deck, it's quite a bit different than when you're looking at the pictures of your cards on your computer or phone screen, because screens are backlit and obviously paper cards are not. So you have to make your digital files much brighter and much higher contrast than you kind of expect to, or else when you print those, they wind up turning out looking really dull, and kind of almost sort of gray and muted. Ink, which is a muted color palette, but even when I had printed it the first time kind of as a test, there was this moment of like, oh my god, what happened? This doesn't look anything like what I had submitted to my printer. And that was just because I didn't change all of those brightness settings. It's a good idea if you're going to make a tarot deck, once you have that artwork on your computer, turn your computer's brightness, like your screen brightness, turn that brightness way, way down so that your screen is kind of dark, and then edit them for brightness and contrast, because you'll get a better idea of what they'll actually look like in print once your computer is really dark, because again, those cards aren't going to be backlit like your computer screen is. So that's an important step if you're going to print your cards. After I've done all of that editing, I print a test, which is important because then you catch things like if the brightness is horrible and if your artwork is really dull or really dark. So it's important to print a test, just make sure everything looks good. A lot of printers offer to print like a proof for you. The one I use doesn't do that unless you're buying like thousands of decks at a time, which I didn't want to do. So I found a printer that would print just a single copy at a time. I'll get more into my printer later, but a lot of print services aren't going to print a single copy at a time. They've got a minimum order. Those printers might be more likely to print you a proof deck before they actually print your entire order, because they're wanting you to order, hundreds of them. I had no idea how many decks I was going to order. I needed a proof, but I didn't know if I was going to order thousands of decks. So I found a printer that would just let me print one deck at a time. And printing a test, really important. Once you've got a test, once you're happy with it, next step is to start marketing it if you haven't already, or at least that's my next step. Like I said, your process can be different, of course. But for me, after I've got my deck and I'm happy with it, marketing. So for me, that's sending it to reviewers. Before anybody else gets it, I try and send it to people who review tarot decks. There are a lot of great people in the tarot community. I'm sure a lot of people watching this know several of them. I'm sure that some of the people watching this are those people. I think I saw Honoreo's name earlier. He's fantastic. Indie Deck Review, of course. Whatever you're making, whether it's a tarot deck or anything else, it's a good idea to find the people who review that thing and then just offer to send them your thing for free. They'll review it. They'll have an audience that they can tell about it. So that's a big part of marketing your deck before you do like a pre-sale or while you're doing a pre-sale, and then also just posting a lot about it online, everywhere you can. I use Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, of course. Scream it from the rooftops, whatever, whatever you need to do to kind of get it out there into the world that you're making this thing and that you want people to see it and hopefully buy it. So marketing, but sending it to reviewers is a big part of that for me, at least. I've tried the like Instagram and Facebook sponsored post thing where you like pay Facebook or Instagram some money to like boost your post and put it in front of more people. And I didn't really get anything out of that. It was not helpful to me. But it might just depend on what kind of reach you already have, what sort of audience you already have. It might depend on what you're making too. Maybe if you're making something other than a tarot deck, boosting your post works better. But for me, I got the most like traffic out of just finding reviewers and posting a lot. I know that the Instagram algorithm, or at least recently, it kind of wants you to be posting every day, but not more than once a day. I know a lot of creators also who have multiple Instagram accounts, which let them post more than one time a day. So I know a lot of people who have like their artist Instagram account and then an account that's like the specific deck, so they can kind of be posting in both of these places at once. That could be useful as well. Little Cryptid Oracle says paying to be a sponsored post can get you unrestricted. I'm not sure what that means. If you want to elaborate, that'd be awesome. I did pay for some sponsored posts, but I didn't get very much from them. But marketing your deck, that's important. So doing research, making art, uploading and editing that art, sending it to reviewers, marketing your product, that kind of thing. And then doing a pre-sale or a Kickstarter or something other than just buying a bunch of decks all at once and putting them in a store. Because having something like a pre-sale or a Kickstarter is going to give you a lot of money, hopefully, to get started with that. You won't have to be paying for that cost up front. You'll kind of know what sort of inventory you need, and it will already be paid for by the people who backed it on Kickstarter or the people who pre-ordered it as you were doing a pre-sale. And something like a pre-sale, which is what I've done for both of my decks so far, you can do that on a marketplace like Etsy, or I guess Instagram has a shop feature now. I also have a website that's hosted through Squarespace, and you can make a store that way, which is useful. Little Cryptid Oracle says, if you like too many things on Instagram, you get restricted for a week. I didn't know that, but I guess you can get unrestricted by paying Instagram for a sponsored post. Etsy will also promote your products, by the way. There's kind of ways to sort of get more attention from Etsy. But Etsy will put your posts, or not your posts, but your product in front of people. So that can be useful too. I noticed that once I put my deck on Etsy, I had a much bigger reach for my next pre-sale. And I think it's because Etsy will kind of do a little bit of advertising for you, which is a little annoying because they will charge you for it. But it is a lot more successful than the sponsored posts that I've tried here on Instagram. So the research, the art, the uploading, printing a test, marketing, pre-sale, and then after that you just have to ship it. Everyone who bought it, you order it from your printer, you get them from your printer, and then you ship them to everybody who bought it. That's kind of the step-by-step process for me. For shipping, something that I really rely a lot on for shipping is like a web service for printing all of my shipping labels at home. Etsy lets you do this. You can pay for shipping labels online and then just print them off on your home printer on like label paper, and then you can just mail everything from home. It saves you a lot of time at the post office. I also use a website / app called ShipStation, and ShipStation's the same type of thing. It sort of imports all of your orders from things like Squarespace or Etsy, and it lets you pay and print postage, and then you can just stick that to a package, take it to the post office, and drop it off without standing in line for a really long time, waiting for the person at the post office to scan all of your stuff. Very useful. Strongly recommend that if you're going to print more than a couple of decks. So that is kind of the step-by-step process. That probably answered a lot of questions that people had. I am also going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about my printer, if there aren't any questions kind of about all of that that I said just now. I know that was a lot of information. Southern Gothic Oracle said me too. I think she's talking about using something like ShipStation and saving time on postage. It's very handy. So a lot of people wanted to know about the printer that I used. Like I said, I was going to talk more about that later, so I'll go ahead and do that now. A lot of people were curious about what printer I used and kind of the pros and cons of that printer. I use a printing service called Make Playing Cards. MakePlayingCards.com is the website. A lot of people use this printer for their deck. There are some very big pros and also some kind of downsides of Make Playing Cards. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those, but Make Playing Cards is a website that you can go to. You can upload all of your artwork there. They have a really nice interface for formatting it into cards, and there's a lot of customization options when you're formatting it into cards. So you can choose like the size of the cards, and you can choose different features for the boxes. They will put a border on your cards if you want them to. A lot of different customizable features that they have, but one of the big reasons I went with Make Playing Cards is that they had that interface on their website where I could kind of set up all of the images there. I edited the brightness and contrast and all of that good stuff on Photoshop, and then when I uploaded it to Make Playing Cards, I was able to kind of just make sure that everything was sized correctly. They sort of give you like the image of your card with a bleed area around it, and you can make sure that everything is lined up exactly the way you want it to be before things are actually printed. Still good to get a test deck printed, but that helps a lot. They also, like I was saying earlier, they let you order just a single deck, which a lot of print services are not going to do. They'll have a minimum order. There is no minimum order with Make Playing Cards. Their bulk discounts scale with how many you're buying. So if you're buying one deck, you're going to spend way more money than you want to on that single deck, versus if you're buying 30 or 50 or 100, you'll be getting bigger and bigger discounts just because more are being printed at a time. But it's still a good idea. I felt like it was a good idea to print just one deck to get started, to make sure that I liked the way that it looked. Because Make Playing Cards doesn't offer a free proof unless you're buying like 1,000 or 2,000 decks at a time. So that was a big part of what I wanted from them, was that interface for sort of formatting the cards. And then again, that they didn't have a minimum order. They also, I personally feel like they have really good customer service. There have been a few times where I have had something that maybe looked a little bit off, and they have like emailed me before they printed it. A human being emailed me and like showed me a picture and was like, hey, this looks like it might not be correct, and we just want you to know, could you approve this if it's correct, or let us know if you need a minute to fix this before we print your order, which is really handy when you're dropping serious money to order a lot of decks at a time. You want to make sure that everything's right. So I have really appreciated the people who work for Make Playing Cards for being very on top of that and not just printing things if they're even slightly suspicious that I might have done something I didn't mean to. That is a really nice thing that they do. And I imagine other print services also do that. I hope that they do that. But Make Playing Cards is actually the only print service I've used. So I don't really have a lot to compare them to, unfortunately. But I have really appreciated that from them. And then again, the last thing I wrote down was bulk discounts. which I mentioned. You're getting a bulk discount per like quantity that you order at a time. The more cards you order at a time, the more that are being printed at once, the more money you're going to save. But they also have this nice feature where the more money you're spending over the course of a long period of time, it accumulates and they give you different discounts based on how much money you've spent in the past, kind of like a loyalty program, I guess, where after you've spent a total X number of dollars over the course of whatever period of time, they start charging you less and less and less. And so that's really nice. It can make it to where you're not paying a whole lot of money per deck as long as you're ordering in large quantities. So there are some downsides to Make playing cards. Personally, I don't feel like they're big downsides. They were definitely worth it for me. One is that they don't have all of the customization options that some other printers are going to have. They do give you a lot of options, especially with like the size and shape of your cards, borders. You can do like silver or gold edging, but you can only really do silver and gold edging. I had thought about doing like black edging for Inkwitch at one point, but that's not something that they offer. I know some people have said that they were kind of disappointed in some of their options for cardstock, but they have a proprietary, that's hard to say, they have a proprietary cardstock that they use that I really like. That's what Inkwitch and Paper Oracle are both printed on. It's very affordable. I feel like it shuffles really well. I feel like it's really durable. But if you're particular about the type of cardstock you want to use, or if there's a specific finish you want to use, they might not have all of the options that other printers are going to have, but they do have a lot of options. And I was not looking for anything very complicated when I made my decks. I wanted something economical and straightforward, and if that is what you're aiming for, they have everything that you need and probably more. Another concern that a lot of people are going to have with Make playing cards, but that I personally do not think that I do, is that they're based out of Hong Kong. If you don't know this already, there's a huge industry for counterfeiting tarot decks. Stacy is here. She can tell you all about that, Southern Gothic Oracle. She and I have spent a lot of time talking about the industry of counterfeiting tarot decks. It's huge. It's crazy. Like, you wouldn't believe how big of like it's a whole industry of counterfeiting people's tarot decks, and like 90 or more percent of that industry is based out of China, and specifically based out of the area around Hong Kong. So it is a little bit unnerving to have your deck printed there. Stacy said it's worse in Shenzhen than it is in Hong Kong. And that is true. But a lot of people are apprehensive to have their deck not printed by an American print company, just because they worry that their art files will wind up in the wrong hands, get sold cheap to somebody who wants to rip off your work, that kind of thing. The reason I'm not worried about that with Make playing cards specifically is because I have seen countless counterfeits made of Inkwitch. Literally countless. It's a full-time job just trying to keep that under control. And I have been able to tell that the artwork on all of them that I have seen so far, every time I've seen one that wasn't being sold by someone I knew had bought my deck and was reselling it, or somebody I had sold wholesale orders to it, every time the artwork has looked different. It has been kind of miscolored, it has been kind of blurry, it has been resized. You could tell that somebody had the cards and had like scanned them or taken photos and done their own printing. So I haven't been worried about Make playing cards like printing extra copies of my deck and then selling them. I haven't been worried about Make playing cards giving my files to people who they don't belong to. I feel very comfortable with Make playing cards as a print service. I really like them. They seem like a good, like reliable print service. However, a lot of people are apprehensive about having their deck printed outside of the US, and that is a legitimate concern, unfortunately, just because there is such a huge industry for making these fake decks. I've got some comments I want to go ahead and go back and look at. Little Cryptid Oracle said they've reached out to a lot of printers all in Shenzhen. A lot of printing happens in that area. That's like where major printers live. I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I'm under the impression it's almost kind of hard to get things printed outside of that area without spending an arm and a leg. Just be careful. Stacy said earlier, just make sure you check their credentials. Look at reviews for them. If you can, talk to creators who've had an experience with them. My experience with playing cards has been really good so far, though. Stacy also said read the book Fake Stuff by Jessica Lin to learn about counterfeit culture in Shenzhen. Book recommendation for you guys. So that is my printer. Make playing cards. Lots of customization options. You can order a single deck for test purposes. Formatting interface on their website, really good. Good customer service, great bulk discounts. Not an American printer though, but I don't mind that personally. So I think. Oh, Stacy said there are a lot of US printers that are good too. I'm sure that there are. I'm sure that there's printers all over the world that are great. But I know that it is cheap or affordable. Cheap is maybe not a nice sounding word. It's economic to get stuff printed out of China. A lot of the times, a lot of the world's biggest printers with the best equipment are based out of China. But there are good printers all over the world. If you want to avoid one that's based out of China, you absolutely can. Or if you have like a local printer, and you just kind of want to support a business that's close to you or something that isn't like a huge industry, there are printers all over the place. Oh, FinFlips Cards says that single deck test copy doesn't cost an arm and a leg for make playing cards. That's true. It's not nearly as affordable as if you're buying a lot of decks at once. But it's not going to cost you like hundreds of dollars or anything like that. I think my test print for Inkwitch was probably like $50, maybe a little bit less, to print one copy of it, versus, paying like 15 or so buying a big inventory. I'm going to go ahead and next talk about the process for the book, which is a little bit different than the process for the tarot deck itself. A lot of people include like the little white booklet that comes with the tarot deck. I didn't do that for Inkwitch because I was trying to make it as affordable as possible. I wanted to put it in as many hands as I could. I also didn't want to lose money on that project, so I didn't make a book for it. I just made it very close to the Waite Smith model of the deck so that people wouldn't really need one. But then there was a lot of people asked for one afterwards, so I wanted to make one later. I didn't make like a little booklet like would usually come with a tarot deck. That is something that Make Playing Cards offers now, but I don't exactly know how it works. I don't know if they come like packaged separately from your decks or if they're in the box. I don't know if their interface for formatting it is as smooth and as useful as the one for formatting the cards is, but I know that that's something that they offer. I made this like big book for the tarot deck. Excuse me. And I used a different printer for that than I did with the deck. I used a printer called Blurb, which I think is actually based out of America. I used Blurb to print the book, so I do have to kind of sort of manage these separate inventories. The book is coming from a different place than the deck is. I'm buying them all separately. Little Cryptid Oracle asked if I ever thought about doing a PDF book instead of a physical one. I actually did both. I have a PDF version of the book that people can download off of my website. If they don't want to buy the hard copy, the PDF is free or pay what you want. I just have that on my website for people to download. But I like a physical book. I know a lot of people like a physical book, and the file was really, really big. It takes a long time to download, and there's a good chance your computer's going to think it's suspicious because it's such a large file. If you wanted to print it off at home, it would also take a long time and a lot of paper and ink. So I did do both a PDF and a physical one. Again, I used a printer called Blurb. What I liked about Blurb was that they had software for formatting the book. That's apparently something that I like in a print service. Blurb makes a program called Bookwrite, and you can format your book in that and then have it turned into a PDF or an ebook, or you can have it printed into all different types of books, hardcover, paperback, like little ring binder books, lots of different options. Before I put it all into Bookwrite, though, I wrote everything in a Word document just because I wanted all of that text there to move around and play with. So I wrote everything in Word, and then I installed Bookwrite, and I just kind of Frankensteined it all over from Word into Bookwrite, so that I could like move the paragraphs around on the page versus having typed them all out there. It was just easier to do that in Word first, and then like copy and paste it onto the page where I wanted in that Bookwrite program. Especially because I also wanted to add pictures and like headers, and I just kind of wanted to format things in a specific way. It was important to me that I'd have like a card pretty big on every other page so that if somebody wanted, they could just like flip through the book until they found the card that they were looking for. I also wanted to like kind of edit into the book some pictures of like spreads and that kind of thing. So having it all kind of over on Word first just made it easier to put it into Bookwrite and then move it around. But I used Bookwrite to format it, and then from there you just upload it to Blurb's website. You can order as many copies of that as you want. Finn asked, what order did you write the book in? Major to minor or all over the place? I think I did it major to minor. I think I did it in order. Which is not how it happened when I was making the art for the deck. I was just kind of doing that all over the place. But for the book, since I already had the deck finished for a while, I think I just did it all in order. I do think I went back at a certain point and wrote like an intro separate from everything, and like just some little sort of extra things into the book other than just the descriptions of the cards. But the descriptions of the cards themselves I did write in order, but you could write that in whatever order you want. Right now I'm working on my Oracle deck, and I have been writing descriptions for each card as I make them. So I'll make a few cards and then I'll write a description for it, and I'm sure those descriptions are going to change a lot later on, but I just kind of wanted to get a jump on writing the book for the Oracle deck before the Oracle deck was completely finished. And so those are all over the place, and it really hasn't been any more or less difficult than it was to do it all in order for the tarot deck. But yeah, I use Blurb for the book and make playing cards for the decks. Blurb also makes the booklet for the paper Oracle. These are made by the same printer. One thing that I didn't love about Blurb was that when I bought hard copies of the book, a lot of them had like little mistakes in like the finish that had gotten put onto the cover. They have like this matte finish, and you could see that like before the finish had had time to dry, somebody had handled the book, and there'd be like a thumbprint like in the finish of the book. So I don't think I'm going to order more hard copies. They were a lot more expensive to print, and several of them were ruined. Not ruined, like they're still usable, but several of them had these little fingerprints on them, in them, which was very frustrating. with the paperbacks that I've had them print, haven't had any problems at all. So that's been nice. Finn said, I'm sure the book can feel intimidating if you don't write anything while you're making the art for the cards. That's true. It was definitely a giant thing to do. But I think it maybe just kind of depends on the person. It's a lot like making the deck. It's a really big project. It's a big undertaking. So just go into it knowing that you have a lot of work in front of you and that it doesn't have to happen all right away. You can take your time on it. And that's fine. It can be intimidating, but the whole project can be intimidating. It's a lot to do, especially if you are going to make a deck and a big book for it. That is a lot of work to do, but you can take it as slow as you need to. You can do it however you want. So whatever makes it easiest for you is fine. A bunch of people also asked about price and if it's expensive, so I'll talk about that too. People wanted to know like some ideas of just the cost of having your deck published. This is not something that I can give like a really clear answer on. Like the easy answer is just yes, it is expensive. Like I said earlier, my test copy cost like $50 maybe to print the single copy, but I buy my inventory in large quantities, and so with bulk discounts my decks cost $15 or so, but I'm buying a lot of them, so I'm spending a lot of money on them. I was really lucky when I started making my deck that I kind of had a little bit of a savings already so that I could print my test copy, so that I could print some copies to give to reviewers and tarot readers and that kind of thing. But a lot of people are not paying for their whole inventory up front. You're often, if you're self-publishing, you're going to be doing something like a pre-sale or a Kickstarter, where the money you make off of a pre-sale or Kickstarter, that's what's paying for it all to be printed and shipped later. So it's not like you're paying this big cost up front. The biggest expense is actually just going to be your time. When I was working on Inkwitch, I was working. I've still got a day job, but it's small. I'm there once a week. It's not my full-time job. But I was working there a lot more when I was working on Inkwitch. And so Inkwitch took me like 3 very stretched out years. I was going very slowly through it because I didn't really have time for it. Or at least not as much time as I did for projects since then. Like I was just saying, it's a huge project. So even if you're just making a deck, even if your book isn't going to be this big thing, it's going to take you a really long time. That is where the biggest expense is, because that is time that you're not at work or doing something else that's making you money yet. So you have to be willing to invest that time. I know that's like a cliche that time is money, but it is. And you're going to be spending a lot of time on this project if you're going to make a deck that's a full 78 or more cards. Even the Lenormand deck was a big time drain. I marathoned the Lenormand deck. It's, I think, 43 cards. That was a marathon. I was working on it every day for hours a day. It was a full-time job, and it still took me almost a year to finish the Lenormand deck. So that is where your big investment actually is going to be. If you're doing something like Kickstarter or a pre-sale, people are paying for your deck before it's even printed. They can't pay you for your time until you have like the profit that you make, if any, off of your printing. Something else with the expense of it that a lot of people I've heard say who make tarot decks, and this is absolutely true, a lot of the money that gets spent on tarot decks is actually spent on the box that the tarot deck comes in, believe it or not. The cards themselves obviously do cost money, but the box is often the most expensive part. I have only printed my decks in like these little cardboard tuck boxes, which are the cheapest thing you can do if you just don't want them to be loose cards, or in like a nondescript, velvet bag. If you want them to have their own box, a little tuck box is the most affordable option, but you can spend serious money on boxes. And I know a lot of people don't like tuck boxes. I don't really like tuck boxes. I like fancy boxes with magnets and hinges and drawers and all of that good stuff. We all do. But those are very expensive. They're going to jack the cost of your tarot deck way, way up. Printing just the cards is going to cost some money. Printing the cards in a really nice box, you could spend 2 or 3 times more when you have a nice box than if you're doing like a tuck box or a velvet bag. Finn said, I've heard this too, tuck box and velvet bag are the cheapest, yeah. Stacy also said so true. Those boxes are expensive. Oh, hey Nolan, welcome. Yeah, so that's where a lot of the money is in the box. But even so, that's something you would want to kind of account for when you're pricing your thing. If you want a really nice box, you're going to need to charge more for your deck. And you need to kind of have made that decision before you start a pre-sale. Or if you're doing something like a Kickstarter, which I've never done before, so I don't know exactly how it works. But if you're doing something like a Kickstarter, you could maybe have like a nicer box as a stretch goal or something, where if you make a certain number of money, you know that the bulk discount you get on cards is going to go up. You can spend a little bit more on a box if you want to. So you could do that as a stretch goal, have a nice box be something that you offer if your project becomes extra funded. Stacy said her cards and books were way cheaper, so she was able to splurge on the box. If you could find a cheap printer, if you can get your cards more affordably, a good box might be worth investing in. People like good boxes. I've seen a lot of reviews for Inkwitch where like people's reviews on YouTube and that kind of thing, and deck flip throughs that people do. I've seen a lot of videos where somebody's talking about my work and being like, oh, I really like this. The art's really nice. I really love this deck, but this box is crappy. It's in this little tuck box. I'm just going to throw this away. And then they, put it in a velvet bag, or they make a bag for it, or put it in a cloth, that kind of thing. People don't really like tuck boxes, but it is a lot more affordable. So that's the expense. A lot of people also asked about the timeline for a project like this, which I've talked about a little bit. There's not a straight answer for this either. The timeline is whatever you need it to be. You don't have to release your deck before you're ready to. Don't decide your timeline until you're already almost done. Don't tell people I'm making this deck and it's going to come out in May, unless you're already almost finished with it and you know that it's going to come out in May. You can just say, I'm making this. It'll come out when it's done. That's fine. You can have an estimate for how long it's taking you, but your timeline can just be whatever the hell you want it to be. Like I said, Inkwitch took about 3 years, but I was doing it really, really slowly. When I started Inkwitch, it wasn't even going to be a deck. I was just drawing cards for fun. I was drawing all of the major arcana. It was just kind of an art project. And then I finished, and a bunch of people were like, where's the rest? When are you finishing? When's the rest of the deck coming out? And I was like, oh, it's not. That was it. It's done. That was the thing I was doing. But as time went on, I was like, no, I had fun with that. I do want to keep making this. I would really like to have a finished deck. I want that for myself, so I'll just keep working on this. But it was months before I picked it back up. And then even when I did pick it back up and continue working on it, it was very slow paced. So Inkwitch took 3 years, but it had these big gaps of time where I wasn't actually working on it. Or I was, just going really slowly until toward the end. And then that became a marathon where I was staying up until 4 a.m. being an insane person. The Lenormand deck happened a lot faster because art had become much more of a full-time job. I had cut way back on the hours at my day job. I could cut way back, which was really nice. A lot of people don't get to do that. So I'm very thankful that I was able to invest a lot more time into that project. Even though it was a marathon that was happening very quickly, it still took about a year before I finished the project and started a pre-sale. So it still took a really long time, even though I was working a lot faster than I was on Inkwitch. That timeline is something you might not even really be able to get a good estimate of what it's going to be like until you've already been working on your deck for a really long time. You kind of won't yet have a sense of how long each card takes you to finish or how long the editing takes you. For me, the tarot cards, I probably spent an average of 2 hours on each artwork, but there was a lot of variety. Some of the cards I knew exactly what I wanted to draw, and I drew it and I liked it and I was done, and it took me an hour. Others, I had to do a lot more thinking, a lot more planning, a lot more research. I had to do 5 drafts of it before I wound up with something that I felt like was acceptable, and, then I spent 6 hours on one card. There's a lot of variety there, so it's hard to even say how much time each piece of artwork is going to take you. But something you can consider if you're trying to get an idea of a timeline is how the aesthetic of your deck is going to affect that timeline. If you want something that's really detailed, really intricate, something that's hand painted on canvas and oil paints and lots of detail and, all of that nice stuff, that's fantastic. It'll make for a beautiful deck, but you have to be aware that it's going to take you a lot more time than if you're doing something that's more stylized or more abstract, where the artwork maybe isn't as detailed, where it's a little bit more playful or cartoony, which I don't mean as a bad thing. There are great decks that are cartoony. That word has kind of a negative connotation sometimes that I don't think is fair. But the aesthetic of your deck, whatever you want it to look like, that's going to affect the amount of time it takes you to produce the deck a lot. It's gonna be a big factor. So that's something to consider. If you want to make a deck and you want to make it fast, make sure that the art style isn't going to be too complicated to do that. If you want to make a deck and you're not real concerned with finishing it in the next year, you could do something really elaborate and wind up with something really detailed, really ornate. But the sort of artistic style of your deck is going to play a big role in whatever that timeline is. Finn asked a question about boxes and components and said, how about card finish and texture decisions? For me, that was very simple. I wanted kind of like a matte finish that wasn't going to cause any friction. I wanted like a smooth feel without it being real glossy. I didn't want something that looked laminated or plastic. So I think that the finish that I use for my decks is Make playing cards like proprietary finish that they use, but I think they call it like a semi-matte or a semi-gloss. I can't remember. It's kind of matte, kind of glossy. It keeps it from feeling plasticky, but lets the cards slide together really well. But it depends on you and what you want to do. I don't really know the price differences between different finishes, but there are some decks that have really interesting finishes. Stacy's Southern Oracle Gothic has like a Southern Gothic Oracle. I can't talk. Stacy's Southern Gothic Oracle has, I think she calls it a rose petal finish. It's kind of velvety. It does make them feel a little weird to shuffle, but not hard to shuffle. They're still really easy to shuffle. It also makes them really unique, though. It kind of gives that deck a little bit of like a neat, I don't know, just almost sort of like a trademark. Like, this deck is special because it has this unique finish. It's definitely something you could do and consider if you kind of want this extra little kind of trademark for your deck. Stacy said printers will usually send samples of different textures. So if you've got a printer you're interested in, you could always reach out to them and ask for that if you don't see something where they're already offering it. She also said I'm not doing that anymore. She changed the finish of her deck. I really liked the rose petal finish. It was neat and special, but it is no more, she says. That's okay. I liked it. I thought it was cool. Most decks use like kind of that semi-matte finish though. Like if you've got like the Waite Smith cards, they've got like a semi-gloss, semi-matte, something that's not too plasticky but slides together easily. That just makes it easy to do like a riffle shuffle with. Yeah, so I don't know a lot about finishes though, honestly. I just used that one. I got it because it sounded like what I wanted and it was really affordable. Again, when I first made Inkwitch, I was really trying to just keep the costs down so that lots of people would buy it. Stacy said I learned that the hard way. So those are like the big topics that people asked about. Most of my questions kind of fell into those areas. I got a few questions that are more specific, and I'll answer those too. But if there's anything about one of those topics I've talked about already that anyone has a question about, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer it. But I did get a few questions that are a little more specific. Somebody asked for advice. I liked this question. Somebody asked for advice in trusting in your aesthetic versus creating what might be considered marketable. And I love that question because I feel like every artist who wants an audience kind of has that conflict constantly, all the time. There is this battle between like what you want to be making versus how it will appeal to the people who are going to be digesting your art. And I've found that for me personally, the absolute most important thing about making a deck is that I love it and I want to use it. When I made Inkwitch, even though people had asked for me to finish it, ultimately I wound up finishing it because I was like, I would like this deck. I would like to use that. I want this. I'm going to make it. And so because that was such a driving factor for me when I was finishing the deck, all of the decisions I made as far as the artwork went, those were decisions that I made based just on what I wanted to see and wanted to have in the cards. Obviously, like I said earlier, you might make some aesthetic choices based on what kind of timeline you have. You might not want something super intricate if you're trying to make something quickly. So there's going to be a lot of things affecting your aesthetic choices. But the big one is that you're making something that you like, that you're happy with, that you're proud of, that you want to use, that you want to have. Making a deck is such a big project, especially if you're making a full tarot deck. I've said that, a dozen times in the past hour. It's a big deal though. And so you want to make sure that whatever you make, you're happy with, because if other people don't want to buy it, or if not as many people want to buy it as you had hoped, you don't want to have made something for them and then them not want it. You are the person who needs to be most fulfilled by the thing you create. That's true of tarot decks. It's true of whatever kind of creative project you're working on. If other people love it, that's awesome. If you're making it to share with other people, that's fantastic. That's a great way to use art. But your vision or your desire for what you're making has to be the thing that comes first, in my opinion. I didn't want to waste my time on a deck that I wasn't going to be happy with, that other people weren't happy with, so I just did the deck that I knew that I would love. So that means that trusting in your own aesthetic is essential. It's not an option. You're not necessarily even balancing your own aesthetic with what consumers want. Your own aesthetic choices, what you want the deck to be, that is the thing. That is what you're doing. And if it's good, if people like it, maybe saying if it's good isn't the right way to word it. If it's got mass appeal, that's great. There's an artist named Violet Hart who said something once that I really liked, that was, artists do not seek out audiences, they create audiences. that art is essentially talking to yourself, and if what you have to say is interesting, then an audience will come. That isn't to say it might not be something that interests you, but it might not interest everybody, and that's okay, as long as you made something that you're happy with. Again, I feel like I'm kind of talking in circles, but that's the important thing. That doesn't mean, though, that you shouldn't be taking feedback from people. For example, I noticed that when I finished Inkwitch, a lot of people did not like the High Priestess. I really like the High Priestess in my tarot deck. It was exactly the High Priestess that I wanted to have, but it didn't vibe with a lot of people, or a lot of people didn't vibe with it, which is fine. Different people have different tastes. Like I said, your thing that you make might not be for everybody, and my High Priestess card was definitely not for everybody. Those same deck reviews where people were like, oh, I hate this tuck box, a lot of them also talked about not liking the High Priestess. And I feel like the High Priestess is a really important card. Aside from the fact that it's a major card, it's also just a lot of people's favorite tarot card. So later on, when I decided I wanted to make the set of extra cards that I released later, I wanted to make, extra Devil and Lovers cards. I wanted to try making the King of Pentacles and the King of Swords again, because I wasn't super happy with those. It had kind of occurred to me when I was working on that, like, oh, this would be an opportunity to try the High Priestess again. I could make another one that maybe people would like more. I kind of took that feedback, that people didn't love my original High Priestess, but I did make an alternative High Priestess that was still something that I wanted. It was still an idea that I thought was good, that I would be happy to use. It was just something that was a second attempt, because I knew my original High Priestess was not really something a lot of people were a fan of. So do what's good for you, do what's right for you, do what is true to your art and your style, but take feedback where you can. Don't follow that feedback if it is going to sacrifice your own truth or whatever in your art project, but take that feedback if you can. Criticism in art is also essential. It is a lot of how artists improve. And I think that that's maybe especially true in something like tarot that's very connective. A lot of people are going to be wanting to feel an intimate connection with your artwork, and by extension you, and then also by extension everyone else who's using the tarot deck. That's something I think is really cool. It means that that feedback is important. But again, I just feel like your artistic vision and the thing that you want to have and the thing that you want to use, that's what always should take priority. So ultimately, you're not going to please every single person. There are always going to be people with different tastes than you, or people who maybe want your art to be something that it's not. They might like your art style, but they might not really like the content, or vice versa. You are never going to please every single person who sees your artwork. So it is just all the more important that you are happy with what you're making, that the person who is the most pleased is yourself. That was a long answer, so I apologize. I did really like that question, though. Somebody asked, this question confused me a little bit, so I'll try and answer it as best as I can. I'm just not entirely sure I understood it. They asked, it's kind of a two-parter. They asked, where does your inspiration come from, and what is, where does your inspiration come from, and where do you draw your universe from? I think that, obviously I can talk about where my inspiration comes from. The universe, I think they're talking about in this question, I think they might be referring to the Endless Oracle that I've been making lately, because that does kind of look like its own universe a little bit. So I'll kind of talk about both of these, I guess. A lot of my artwork, and this kind of goes for my artwork in general, as well as the Endless Oracle, and Inkwitch, too. A lot of my artwork's inspired by folklore, especially Arthurian legend. I think King Arthur stories are really interesting. I really like fairy tales and mythology. And something that I do strive for in my artwork is to create a universe that feels nostalgic and familiar to people, even if they've never been there before. I want something that people will kind of have sort of this immediate sense of connection with, that they're already familiar with what this place is or what this artwork is like. I like that sense of nostalgia, and I feel like I was saying earlier, tarot is something that people want to have an intimate connection with. And so I feel like when you're doing something like a tarot deck, I like having that kind of nostalgic looking art for the sake of helping people feel connected to the artwork. So for me, creating that sense of nostalgia comes from or by drawing from themes and archetypes that are really prevalent in stories like folklore and mythology. A lot of folk stories and myths and legends all kind of draw from a lot of the same central themes. And fortunately, that's really easy to do with something like tarot, because you're working with things like kings and queens and the sun and the moon, and these things that are sort of universal symbols all over the place in literature, in fairy tales, in movies, in comics, in stories everywhere. It makes it a little easier to create something that's connective and, like I said, nostalgic. Aesthetically, I'm really inspired by storybooks and comics, comic books. Tarot's a narrative tool, ultimately. We're kind of using it to tell a story. It's artwork that's placed often in a sequential order, and then we kind of interpret a story from it to gain insight into our lives or predict the future or whatever you're using tarot for. It often has this narrative quality. And so I like that comics and storybooks are narrative forms of artwork like tarot. And for me, it is kind of fun to be really consciously aware of that as I'm creating the artwork for something like a tarot deck. Because I feel like it just lends itself really well to tarot as a medium. That's especially true of Endless Oracle that I've been working on lately. I really want that one to feel like it is a story or a comic. I want it to look like it kind of has that aesthetic, so that it creates a universe which feels familiar, but is also going to lend itself really well to the narrative aspect and the sequential aspect of reading cards. Hopefully that answers that question. I, again, wasn't entirely sure what, what that question meant. But hopefully I covered it somewhere in that. The last question that I got, I have been thinking about like all week because I still don't really know how to answer it. But they asked, what do you know now that you wish you knew before you made your deck? By which I assume they mean my first deck. And I have a hard time answering this because I kind of feel like there are a lot of things that I do know now that I didn't, but I don't know if I wish that I knew them before because I kind of figured them all out in the process of making it. Maybe I wish that I knew just how big the like tarot community online is. I followed a few people here on Instagram and Facebook and that kind of place who were tarot people, but not very many. I knew that there was a big tarot community out in the world, but I have been really pleasantly surprised at how much that tarot community has embraced me and my work in a real friendly way. I often think of myself a lot more as an art person than a tarot person. I'm both, of course, but if people ask what I do, I say, oh, I'm an artist. I don't say I'm a tarot person or a tarot reader or whatever. I tell them I'm an artist. And it has been really nice that the people I've met who do tarot, and there are a lot of them, it has been really nice that they have just kind of welcomed me into that community without a second thought. I have enjoyed that a lot, and I've gotten a lot of support from it. People have shared my work and said really nice things about it and made me feel really good. And I think that if I had kind of been prepared for that community before reaching it. I don't know, maybe I would have been more confident about my work, but that's something a lot of people who are watching this are already going to know. If you're making a tarot deck, that's something you might already know. But the other things that I needed to learn, I just kind of learned them as I went. At any point during the process of making a tarot deck, if you have questions, you can just ask them. You can Google things. If you're looking for services that print tarot decks, you can just type into the internet, how do I print a tarot deck? How do I make a custom tarot deck? I think that's how I found make playing cards. I just typed into Google like custom tarot deck printing, and I found make playing cards and a bunch of other services. Same with like Blurb. If I wanted to make a book, how do I make a custom book? You can just ask those questions out into the internet and you'll get answers. That's a really nice thing. But having a community is really nice too. Before all of this, I already had a good art community that was really helpful and I could bounce ideas off of them. And it would have been kind of nice to have a bigger tarot community at that same time to sort of help with the brainstorming process. A lot of the artists that were kind of helping me figure out how to make my tarot deck were not tarot people themselves, or at least not as much of a tarot person. So it would have been kind of nice to have both of those communities available from the very beginning. But I have both of them now, which is great, fantastic. And obviously things worked out fine. Even not knowing that there was such a big and welcoming tarot community out there. Finn said, you wish you had let your hair grow out. My hair's kind of long right now. I really need to get a haircut. I actually wanted to get a haircut before I did this because I feel a little self-conscious about how shaggy it is. But I wasn't able to do it in time. But I'm doing that next week. Getting my haircut soon. Yeah, that's the last question that I had as far as things that people asked ahead of time. If anyone wants to ask anything while I'm here, I'm happy to answer it. Or if you want to message me, you can email me, you can DM me on Facebook, or not Facebook, I mean on Facebook, but Instagram. You can DM me here on Instagram and I'll answer anything that I can. But if anyone wants to ask any questions tonight, I'll hang out for a little bit with you guys if you want, and you can feel free to ask whatever you'd like. Finn said no, which I think he means he wasn't trying to make me feel self-conscious about my hair being shaggy right now. I don't know if I really want to grow it out. I feel like my hairline is thinning out too much for me to want to grow it out. It just looks better short. It looks neater. I feel better about it. Robbie said, what advice would you give to those that say I'm not far enough on my journey or I don't have enough experience to make a divination deck? I've got a few things. The big one is, who the hell are they? What do they know about you being far enough on your journey? If you feel like you're far enough on if you're confident enough on your tarot journey to start making a deck, then you're far enough on your tarot journey to start making a deck. That's not up for debate. They don't get to tell you that you're not far enough on your tarot journey to be making a deck. That's not their call. But if you feel like maybe you're not far enough on your tarot journey to make a deck, making a deck is a great way to learn more about tarot. I cannot tell you how much better I am at reading tarot now than I was before I started working on my deck. You learn a lot in the process of creating a deck because hopefully you're trying to absorb so much information about the artwork that you're producing. Since you're working from a template of cards that already exist, you are doing research, you're looking at a lot of different interpretations of whatever card you're working on from different people. You're deciding what your own personal interpretations of that card are and what you kind of want to be first and foremost in the artwork you're creating. And so you will learn a lot about tarot by making a deck. You'll become a much better tarot reader by making a deck. And I imagine that that's true of anyone, no matter how much experience they have reading tarot before they start working on a project like that. Your tarot journey will advance by making a deck. So, first of all, that's not their call. They don't get to tell you that you're not far enough in your tarot journey to make a deck. If somebody tells you that, just blow it off. They don't know what they're talking about. They're being judgmental. You can ignore them. Second of all, making the deck can be a part of that growth and a part of that journey. That's the advice that I have. NJane13 said, I think that it's okay to not know the tarot community before doing a deck, especially if you're an artist, because each person that reads tarot draws on their own assumptions when they look at the art. That's very true. Every version of any card is going to be interpreted differently by their own assumptions, by different people. I know a lot of people have looked at my cards, which I drew with very set intentions. I knew exactly what I was trying to say or do with that artwork. And I've seen people look at the card and talk about the card and get something completely not what I meant for them to get, which is fine. That's part of what I think is really cool about tarot. It did make me apprehensive to make my guidebook, though, because I didn't want to say this is what it means, this is what I'm saying, this is what the artwork is. So throughout my guidebook, I really wanted to encourage people to spend some time with the cards on their own before they read the book. I also wanted it to encourage people to just ignore what I'm saying if they feel like it contradicts an assumption that they make about the cards. I feel like with tarot, or whatever type of cards you're reading, your own intuition about it should kind of take precedent. Obviously, the cards are supposed to mean certain things, like death means death and strength means strength, etc., etc. But your interpretation of that on a deeper level varies from person to person, and that's part of what makes it cool. Oh, I was also going to say about Robbie's question, I had been reading tarot for years before I started working on my tarot deck. I learned Lenormand so that I could make a Lenormand deck. I heard about it. I was interested in making an Oracle deck, and while I was learning about Oracle decks, I heard about Lenormand. I thought, oh, that sounds cool. I might rather do that, but before I do that, I have to learn more about what it is. I have to try it out. I have to use it. So I'd only been reading Lenormand cards for half a year before I started making a deck, and I kind of set out learning it because I thought maybe I would want to make a deck. So I don't know, I just wanted to touch on that because I think you can make a deck whenever you feel like it. Well, if anyone has any other questions, they can go ahead and ask. I'll hang out for just another minute, but hopefully you've gotten some good information from this that's helpful in some kind of way. Again, you can feel free to message me anytime you want if you have questions. I'll try to always do my best to answer them. Like I said at the very beginning of this stream, though, I've only made 2 decks. I'm working on my 3rd one. I'm honestly just kind of winging it the whole time, so I'm not the most qualified person to give you real good advice on making a tarot deck, but if you're ever curious about what my process has been like, I'm happy to talk about it. And offer whatever advice I can from the experience that I have had. I'm going to try and save this video here on Instagram if they'll let me. Sometimes Instagram doesn't let me post live streams. Sometimes it does, but I will try to save this one if it lets me. But again, feel free to reach out to me anytime that you've got a question or just want to talk about tarot and art and making tarot art. Yeah. Well, thank you all for hanging out with me tonight and letting me talk about a thing that I like to talk about. Hopefully you had fun and learned something cool, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. But I hope you guys have a good rest of your night. Have a good week coming up tomorrow. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.